We are live, Saurabh.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Let's give it a minute for the queue to form up, and then we'll kick off. So thank you, folks. Thank you for joining our webinar with R. Gopalakrishnan and Harish Bhat, both erstwhile senior executives in the Tata Group. Very successful authors of multiple books, which I'm sure many of you would have read, and also fabulous public speakers. We're very fortunate, both Gopalakrishnan ji and Harish Bhat ji have graced Marcellus webinars before, and you guys have been enthusiastic attendees of many of the past webinars. Today, we are joining these gents to discuss a very good book, a book that I really enjoyed reading, Jamsetji Tata, Powerful Learnings for Corporate Success, which Gopalakrishnan ji and Harish Bhat ji have authored. So I'll do a quick bio on these two luminaries. Then we'll do a half an hour discussion around the book. But the main purpose of this call is for you to fire in your questions. My colleague Salil Desai, who's our head of research, he will then take your questions in the second half of the webinar. So keep punching in your questions in the Q&A box in Zoom. And in the second half of the call, we'll try to take as many of your questions as possible. And if you have plenty of questions early on, then I'll put my questions in abeyance and take yours. So Gopal, Harish, welcome to our webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. So let me start by giving you a quick sense of their impressive resumes. Again, I stress that I'll not be able to do justice to the formidable CVs these luminaries have. So quick summary. Gopalakrishnan sir studied physics at Kolkata University, then engineering at IIT Kharagpur, and also attended the advanced management program at Harvard Business School. He was a professional manager from 1967, chaired Unilever in Arabia, then was the MD of Brook Bond, vice chairman of Hindustan Unilever, and then a director of Tata Sons in several Tata companies. He's also an independent director of Press Trust of India, non-executive chairman of Castrol India. He's written 17 books. I've read several of them. Me and Marcellus have loved reading his books on TCS, HDFC Bank, Marico. I'm sure there are others that I'm omitting at this juncture. I think in the wallpaper behind Gopal, you might be able to see some of those books when he speaks. Harish Bhat is an avid marketer. He's been the brand custodian of the brand Tata, one of the most expensive, one of the most valuable brands in the world. Before he became brand custodian of Tata, he helped create some of India's most iconic brands, such as Tanishq, such as Titan, Fast Track, Tata Tea, Chakra Gold Tea. Forbes listed him as one of the world's top 10 most influential chief marketing officers in 2022 and in 2023. Leaving aside branding, he's also held senior roles in the Tata Group over the last 36 years, including being a chief operating officer of the jewelry and watches businesses of Titan Company, and MD and CEO of Tata Global Beverages, which is now called Tata Consumer. He's also served as the non-exec chairman of Tata Coffee, a listed company. Post-retirement, Harish continues to serve as an advisor to Tata Sons and is a non-exec director on the boards of some Tata companies. Those of you who want to read Harish's greatest thoughts, he writes 2 newspaper columns, The Curious Marketer in Hindu Business Line and Tongue in Cheek in Mint newspaper. His books are fabulous. I've learned a lot from his books. Before I get into the meat of our discussion with these luminaries, couple of points, folks. Many of you know that we hold several Tata businesses in our portfolios. We will be discussing many of those businesses on this call. I'm not trying to push those stocks to you. If you are interested in investing in any of those businesses, please do your own research. Our positions in those companies are both as investors in Marcellus's products. Our parents are also invested in our products, thus in the Tata companies. And needless to say, our 7,000 clients are invested in those Tata companies via our PMS portfolios. So do your own research before you invest in those companies. So let me kick off with a question which has been burning me up all through the weekend as I read this excellent book. Our Gopalakrishnan and Harish Bhat individually are successful authors and individually are authorities on the Tata Group. Why did they choose to collaborate for this book? And since Gopal, it says in the final pages of the book, you made the call to Harish 2 years ago. If you don't mind telling us, what led you to call Harish Bhat to ask, request him to work as a collaborator on this book?
Well, thank you. Firstly, it's a great pleasure to be on the Marcellus show again. And I'll get to your question without any whataboutery. Why did you choose to collaborate? For about 7 or 8 years, especially after my retirement from active executive service, the thought had passed my mind that why is India not growing the way it should?
Mm.
And you get lots of articles and views on this.
Yeah.
And I hypothesized, based on my practical experience, that India is not growing the way it should because it doesn't have a quote unquote proper industrial policy.
Right.
It has a lot of industrial investment rules, but that's policy and rules are different. Neither does it have a philosophy. Okay. And I said, well, can I look into the inwards into my own career path with two wonderful companies,
Mm-hmm.
Unilever, which began operations in India in 1888 when the first case of Lifebuoy arrived in Metia Bruce in Kolkata. And of course, Tata's, which began in 1868 with the trading company set up by Jamsetji Tata. And I started to find that both these companies had three things. They had a philosophy, they had a policy, and they had some practices. And I said, if you apply this to the national scene, would you get something different from the 1956 industrial policy resolution? Then I felt it would be pompous for two guys who had worked in a company, compared to the national macro scene, we have done very small jobs. So we won't preach to other people how they should run the country, but let's share our experiences. And what's common between Harish and me is Tata, because he can't talk firsthand about lever. And so we chose Tata to say, can we crystallize this whole point about philosophy and practice in industrial policy? And I said that will become a very dry academic book, and neither do I have the academic credentials, nor am I an Oxford University professor or research scholar. So why can't we make it chatty? Because this is not aimed at fellow academics to be read out in academic conferences. It's meant to help Pandu set up good companies.
Right.
And a statistic that really struck me in the solar plexus is that India has 63 million enterprises,
Mm-hmm.
of which only 19,000 have a turnover, have a capital of more than 10 crores. I mean, can you imagine 63 million enterprises with the SME ministry?
Mm-hmm.
Only 19 have a capital of 19 crores. About 4, 5,000 are listed, and about a couple of hundred are the ones that are actively traded.
Yes, sir.
And I said, industrial landscape of India seems to be a lot of little pygmies and microbes and viruses. And can we share our experiences? And Harish could provide, if I may use the word, uh, if I could be the Veda Vyasa, he would provide all the stories and the narratives that go into this, because without the narratives, it will become a dry academic book. And that's what made me pick up the phone. And
Fabulous.
I found that he's about to retire. Actually, the idea came to our mind 6 years ago, but flopped around for some time for various reasons. One of them only being that Harish was very busy with his day to day work. And I was an idle retired fellow. So I said, get him on his birthday. And that's why I called him. And that's how the book came. And that's why we collaborated.
So basically, you're the architect here, and Harish is the hardworking mason who
No,
fills
no, no.
in.
I don't think that's a fair way to put it. One can say that, ideas come and multiply. So the final idea is not any one person's idea. As you know, a squared plus b squared uh, is not equal to a plus b squared. There's a 2ab that has to be fitted into that.
Right. I think here 1 + 1 has
Yeah.
become 11. I'm so glad you guys put your minds together because both the structure of the book and the case studies are riveting. But Harish, I'll turn to you with the next question because you are of the two of you, you spent far the longer amount of time in the Tata Group. I think you've worked in the Tata Empire for the best part of 40 years. Right. The question that I kept thinking about as I kept reading this beautifully written book is Jamshedji Tata passed away more than a century ago. I think 120 years ago, Jamsetji Tata passed away, right? It's one thing for you guys to identify his value system, which you've done beautifully. You've told us about his exploits, but I kept asking myself that, what tangible proof do you have? What tangible proof do you have that the Tata Group continues to espouse the great man's values, rather than falling rather than falling victim to the prevalent fads and fashions of corporate life? For example, shareholder value is a sort of big fashion of our times. So I kept asking myself, how do I know that indeed Tata Group is still run as per the value system of this great man, rather than being run by the as per the fashion of the day?
Yeah. So, Saurabh, I think there was quite a bit of research that we did there. If you look at the structure of this book,
Hmm.
the philosophy of Jamsetji Tata has been espoused in several P's. There is the purpose that
Yeah.
with which he pursued the business: pioneering, people, progress, persistence, principles, and the use of profits with responsibility.
Yes.
Okay, these are the 7 or 8 P's which have been put down.
Yes.
What we did is, for each of those P's, we examined the wide arc of history from Jamsetji Tata's time until today. And between Mr. Gopalakrishnan and myself, we established that whether it was the central purpose of the organization, that the community and nation is center stage, nation building is the core purpose of the group, or whether it be persistence with key strategic initiatives which are in the right direction and which need to come to fruition, or whether it is indeed principles and doing business with integrity. We had a discussion to establish how that chain has flown ever since Jamsetji Tata's time until today. And we said, rather than do this conceptually, let's look at specific examples from the times of Jamsetji Tata, Dorabji Tata, JRD Tata, Ratan Tata, right until the modern age, to establish whether that particular P has flown through the wide arc of 156 years of history. So we used our experience, we used our judgment, and then we used specific examples of how the Tata Group had progressed on the stream of that particular P over several years. So if you look at the structure of this book, Saurabh, if you take one specific chapter of the book, let's take, for instance, purpose, you will find, firstly, that there is a wonderful and thoughtful essay about why purpose is important to an organization. And that essay covers not just the purpose of the Tata Group, but talks about the purpose of many corporates, many other corporates, which also have a sense of purpose, and the sense of purpose is not just enhancing shareholder wealth alone. And then thereafter, you will find 3 different stories from 3 different eras of the group, illustrating how purpose has been central to the voyage of the Tata Group over so many years. So that's the kind of voyage that we pursued, Saurabh. I think we used our experience. We also used specific case studies. And through those case studies, we distilled that particular P was alive in the group, alive and kicking over so many years of time. That's the approach that we took to the writing of this book. And I believe that each of those stories are case studies unto themselves. Each of them can be case studies that are taught in a business school to establish that particular P behind the Tata Group.
Fabulous.
And if I
So
can
let me.
add just a line to that,
Go on, sir.
Saurabh,
Go on.
looking at the cover, somebody may think this is another biography of Jamsetji Tata, right? But his face is so striking that we use it for the cover.
Yeah.
But throughout the book, our attempt was to show that what fantastic icons have been produced by the ecosystem of Tata, not by Jamsetji Tata. So if you talk about a Fakir Chand Kohli, you talk about Suman Mulgankar, Darbari Seth, um, and we avoided too much of the present. Instead of, if you keep writing about
Sure.
Ratan Tata,
Yeah.
people will say this is a Chaplusi book, We didn't want that either. But it's a dramatic exposition of how icons have sustained this. So I just thought I would add that to what
Fantastic.
Harish said.
So, Gopal, I'll come to you on this purpose point, right? So I grew up in Delhi, right? So unlike you, I didn't have the privilege of growing up in Kolkata. I grew up in Delhi, and on the playground in Delhi, the term niyat, the phrase niyat, was used to connote luck or fate, right? It was used to connote luck or fate. Teri niyat nahi thi. So if you got out first ball, it was seen as bad niyat. That's just destiny. That sort of got out first ball and so on the playground, right? In the book, you guys have used the phrase niyat in a very different sense of the word. It's a very creative use of niyat. Could you just tell our tell our viewers today, what do you mean by niyat, and how is niyat associated with the Tata Group and Jamsetji Tata?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that the use of the word niyat in Delhi, like many other things in Delhi, is incorrect. Niyat has nothing to do with luck. The word niyat came into my mind space because I was having dinner in Paris. I was the chairman of Indo-Morocco Phosphate Company, which is a Moroccan company. And I was talking to my Moroccan counterpart, and he used the word niya, and that was an Arabic word. I never connected that with niyat. And I asked him, what does niya mean? And he said, niya means what is your real intent? What does you really want to do? I said, oh, maybe the Indian word, Urdu word niyat has come from niya. He said, maybe. I didn't know you have a word called niyat. When I came back, I found the etymology of niyat is indeed derived from Arabic niya. And niya is used to say, आपका मकसद क्या है? इरादा क्या है? What is the long-term vision that you have? And that's why we use the word niyat. Now, maybe in popular usage in the cricket field in Delhi or somewhere, it has acquired a different name. It has absolutely nothing to do with luck. And so the word niyat appealed to me, A, because of its etymology was a little unusual and unknown to me, and it matched in a very oriental sense with what management gurus in the United States write as uh, strategic intent. A word coined by one of our own brethren, C.K. Prahlad. What is your strategy? आपको करना क्या चाहिए? So that's how the word niyat came in. Of course, in India, we are obsessed with niyam. So that fell into place. I had to fill up the middle pillar. And the middle pillar, I am a great believer that human conduct reveals more than all the rules of SEBI and Reserve Bank and various regulatory authorities. So it fits into a nice 3N model.
And the link between niyat, Jamsetji Tata, and the Tata Group, Gopal sir?
Sorry?
What is the link between niyat, Jamsetji Tata's value system, and the Tata Group? Where does the strategic purpose kick in here?
So what we've done in the book, I'll summarize it in the interest of time and brevity, is to imagine niyat, niti, and niyam as being like a river. Okay. If you go to the Gangotri, the beginning of the Ganga is very, very simple. Every river, I'll take Ganga for the purpose of our discussion. It's pure, unadulterated. It's come from the Lord of the mountains.
Yeah.
And the stories, it has stories around its niyat also. How did it start? And then it comes down into the plains, and there are multiple currents. It acquires a certain gravitas. It becomes niti, because that original philosophy manifests in the way people behave. And it creates stories. Every river in the world nurtures civilizations, icons, stories. And the number of stories around Ganga or Kaveri or Tungabhadra, we all know in our country. Likewise with the Nile and the Tigris and the Euphrates. And then it goes into the delta region, into the sea, from where it began, where little rituals start to come along. So niyat, niti, and niyam translated into a river metaphor, and we called it philosophy, which Jamsetji Tata was so utterly simple. The community is not a part of your stakeholder, he is center stage.
Right.
I mean, you can't make it more simple than that. Now, even religions, Huma, Hukta, Hrashta in Zoroastrianism, or you can take Hindu philosophy or any other religion. The religion is always very, very simple. Then as it comes down and people start practicing, it breaks up into A, B, C, D. But there are lots of icons and stories. You'll say the Sufi system, and you'll mention Sufi saints and Rumi and so on and so forth. And then it becomes rituals, it becomes factions, if I may use that word without disrespect. And what happens in Tata is therefore a simple philosophy, community center. The river has been through, right? It's not yet gone into the delta, but we have a lot of rituals in Tatas. And I think some of them are described, and Harish can describe them if you wish in summary again. And I believe that these three have to be in harmony. The philosophy, the icons and the narratives around them, and the rituals. When these get out of kilter, the river overflows and corporate destruction happens. When the philosophy, the icons and the narratives and the rituals are not in harmony. So just like in reverse, there's a hydrology. For companies also, there's a hydrology. And the hydrology requires these to be in balance. And that's exactly what we have tried to demonstrate through the writing and the formatting of this book in a particular way. I
I
hope
mean,
I'm not sounding too esoteric, but Harish
no,
can
I think
bring
this
it
is.
down to earth if you wish.
So let me then focus on something which is linked to the icons, the rituals, the practices, but also speaks to those of us who are running small companies. So I think in the people chapter in the book, you guys write that you write, and I quote, a rigorous discipline of planning and pursuit of talent excellence is either weak or absent in many Indian companies. Quite often, there exists no defined process. I think you're referring to talent management here. And when there is a semblance of process, you say, it tends to be personality driven rather than process driven, right? So, as shareholders in many Tata Group companies, we've often asked folks like Harish on calls like this, how does Tata Group find great leaders or cultivate great leaders and get them to serve decade after decade in the cause of the group? Uh, you make a very powerful link between Jamshedji's values and how they've taken the Tata Group in a different direction relative to other companies with respect to talent management. So, Rishi, again, you spent 4 decades there. What is the link between
Yes.
Jamshedji Tata's values and the impact that has on fabulous
Yeah.
executives like the folks at Titan or at Tata Consumer serving there for so long?
Yeah. So Saurabh, you're absolutely right. The Tata Group has been blessed to have a wonderful pipeline of leaders and managers over the decades. If you look at the people chapter in this book, first and foremost, Saurabh, if you go back to the times of Jamshedji Tata, where he was probably his own CHRO, and you look at the process he followed to get people to head enterprises that he created, you will see that he used very, very good logic of recruiting people for their attitude, then training them for their skills. The first person he recruited as leader was Bizonji Mehta, who ran the Empress Mills for him. Bizonji Mehta came from being a ticket inspector and a station master in the Indian Railways. But Jamshedji Tata respected him for his integrity, his common sense, his people management, and he delivered superbly to make the Empress Mills one of the most profitable enterprise of its kind. And he stayed behind with Jamshedji Tata for the rest of his life because he believed in Jamshedji Tata's philosophy of people putting people, employees, community center stage. He stayed with him throughout. That is the case with several other people who I have quoted here. People like Burjorji Patsha or people like Charles Page Perrin, who came from New York. And if I extend this right until today, Saurabh, I cannot assume to speak for all my colleagues, but somewhere in this book, in the people chapter, I have described my own voyage. I have spent my entire career with the Tata Group, 37 years, and I've often been asked why. The reason is the same reason that Bezonji Mehta spent those years with the Tata Group 120 years or 130 years ago. That the philosophy of Jamshedji Tata of putting the community center stage, contributing to the nation, and having a larger purpose for the enterprise has also appealed greatly to me and appeals greatly to so many of my colleagues across many Tata Group companies. Now, what that does, Saurabh, is of course, working at a job, it's very important to have interesting work to do, very important to have career progress, which no doubt Bezonji Mehta had, and I have also had in my career. But what it also does, it is gives you a higher purpose. It also gives when you're working with the Tata Group that you're contributing not just to the success of an individual enterprise, but somewhere through the Tata Trust, through the ownership that the Tata Group has, you're eventually contributing back to the community and the nation. Because if your viewers do not know, then I should explain that 66% of the Tata Group is held by the Tata Charitable Trust. So 66% of all dividends issued by
Hmm.
Tata Sons go to the Tata Charitable Trust and
Wow.
then are invested in the building of cancer hospitals, the Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai, the Tata Cancer Hospital at Rajarhat in Kolkata, or a network of cancer hospitals coming up now, or the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, the fight against COVID-19. So all that joins together to give you a higher purpose. So that's one reason, Saurabh. The other reason is the Tata Group works with a lot of integrity. One of the things that Jamshedji Tata emphasized to Bezonji Mehta in the Empress Mills was the need for absolute integrity in the way they did business. And Jamsetji Tata says this in 1895, that we don't think we are more generous or more philanthropic than others, but we think we started this business on sound and straightforward business principles. And that continues until today. 37 years of my working with the Tata Group, and not once has the group asked me to do anything which is against my conscience. So you can sleep well at night, which you will agree with me is worth its weight in gold at any time in history, and particularly so in today's day and age. So I think it's a combination of the purpose of the group. It's a combination of doing business with integrity. It's a combination of good, interesting work. And it's a combination, I started in Tata Tea, and I must say I competed at that time against Mr. Gopalakrishnan's ex-company, Hindustan Lever. We were a small plantation company trying to establish brands in India. And we gave Unilever a fight for its money, and we established very strong brands which are favorites in the country today: Tata Tea, Chakra Gold Tea, Tata Tea Agni, and so forth. That was the experience of a lifetime. How often do you get to do that? But the Tata Groups empowers you, enables you to do what you want, and gives you very interesting work to do as well. So it's a combination of many of those factors, Saurabh, which I think were prevalent in Jamsetji Tata's time, prevalent across the decades, and continue to prevail in the Tata Group until today.
Fabulous. So time is ticking away. I've got 3 minutes, which I want to use for asking Gopal one last question, and then we'll turn to the Q&A box, which Cyril will take questions from. Folks, keep punching in your questions in the Q&A box. The queue is swarming up, but we'll try to make the most of the remaining 33 minutes we have with these luminaries. So Gopal sir, Sir John K has been our corporate strategy advisor for pretty much the entirety of my business career. And earlier this month, John published his latest book, The Corporation in the 21st Century. It went straight into the FT's shortlist for Book of the Year. And the main point John makes in this book, right, in the Corporation in the 21st Century, he says that the main job of the entrepreneur is to bring together people of different talents, people, suppliers of different abilities and talents, and make them work together cohesively to create a product or a service, right? Now, in this book, in the book on Jamsetji Tata, you've given several examples of remarkable examples of, over the last 120, 125 years, how different generations of leaders in the Tata Group have brought together people of different talents and made them work together for a cohesive purpose. The most dramatic, I thought, was the creation of Tata Steel, and how Jamsetji went to the other end of the world and hired one of the world's great engineers. So, Gopal, do you just want to tell us a little bit more about that episode of the creation of Tata Steel and how that exemplifies much that is great about this business icon?
I think you framed your question very well, because it's a question of, can you tell us how it exemplifies? Because Tatas have done it repeatedly.
Yes, sir.
The Western narrative is usually about core competence and knowing everything there is to know about steel making or aluminum making.
Yes.
Jamsetji Tata never pretended that he knew everything about steel making, but he was quite an itinerant character. I think he traveled for 50-60% of the year.
Wow.
And in those days, it was by steamer. From the records he has written of his travels, I did a rough, and I don't stand and present this as research, but he traveled 50-60% of the time. Of the 60%, probably 30% went on steamers and 30% in talking to people.
Wow.
And the first thing I want to say is that he obviously saw the world outside and himself as a window of the world outside into the company. And when I look today, when I was in service, Ratan Tata used to travel maybe even more than 60% of the time, but his efficiency of connection was far greater because of air travel and so on and so forth. So that's one thing. Keeping your mind open to new ideas. That's the first thing. The second is domain knowledge. You didn't know about steel, so you go and get the world's best steel guy. And Charles Page Perrin, which Harish has mentioned, and the very dramatic story of how he went and persuaded Charles Page Perrin, and what Charles Page Perrin's reaction was to all this has been described in this book and many other stories. And then you cut and come to passenger cars. Again, I'm jumping right across. And when it was required, Tata didn't hesitate to go out and get experts. And not only that, they went and bought Jaguar Land Rover.
Yes.
Amongst many, many reasons to buy it. One was there will be damn good engineers there who know very modern automotive technology. And this pattern keeps repeating. And it's not been uncommon. I won't say it's been very common because there are talented Indians as well nowadays, but it's not been very uncommon to get a foreign person. Although we were the attitude internally was nationalism and Swadeshi, uh, you managed to bring in talent from outside, and outside doesn't necessarily mean international, meaning people of other nationalities. I'll give you one little anecdote. I joined Tata's at a fairly late age compared to Harish. He joined at 25, I joined at 52. And I was a wizened old guy, or so I thought, having worked for 30 years before that. Um, and there are other people whom Ratan Tata assembled in his master plan. At one stage, about 2003 or 4, I made a I make a list of the top 30 people or 40 people in the group. And that included people like Ravikant and Ramadurai and Muthuraman and so on and so forth. And I found that it had 50% quote unquote outsiders. 50%.
Wow.
Outsider being a person who didn't come at a young, malleable age, say under 30, 35, who came after a significant career elsewhere. Ravikant was of that variety. Prasad Menon was of that variety. And Kishore Chokar was of that variety, right? And there were other people like Muthuraman and so on who had been groomed from within. So I just took it to Ratan Tata and I said, hey, did you realize half of people are. He said, that can't be true. I gave him the list. And he said, yeah, now that you mention it, you're right. I said, how did Tata learn to accept so many outside microbes? Because nature tells you that you reject too many
Yes.
outside microbes. He said, I have absolutely no idea. We thought we were good people and we brought them in. And you guys have stayed around with us. So to me, this showed a level of what I might call congenital adaptability.
Fantastic.
Which Tatas have possessed. And it has been continued after my time. So I think when you say that the oldest living species is the microbe, you develop a new respect for it.
Fantastic. And that was lovely. I think I'll hand over to Salil. There's a long queue of questions that Salil has to take. Over to you.
Right. Thanks, Saurabh. Mr. Gopalakrishnan, in fact, the anecdote that you were just telling about, there was a question exactly on that, as an outsider, what were you doing in the Tata Group? And there's so many, managers from the group itself. So it was good to see that you preempted a question. So we have one question, which is, pretty interesting, is that, if you think of next 150 odd years for the group, right, given that there might not be many people with the Tata surname in Tata Sons or on the Tata Sons board, how will these philosophies or the purpose we carry forward into the future?
So, Salil, I'd like to answer that question.
Sure.
That's exactly the purpose of this book. One of the reasons that this book has been written is to show how the philosophy and principles of Jamsetji Tata have been institutionalized in the group. And as Mr. Gopalakrishnan mentioned, this is done through a very clear articulation of philosophy. Everyone in the group, all the leaders of the group clearly understand and imbibe the philosophy of Jamsetji Tata, that the community and the nation is center stage and nation building is what we are here for. Second, if you look at all the leaders of the group over the eras, okay, if you look at people like Sumant Mulgaonkar, people look like people like F.C. Kohli, people like Darbari Seth, people like Nani Palkiwala, people like Dr. Irani, people like Mr. Krishna Kumar, people like Mr. Chandrasekharan, who is the current chairman of the Tata Group, people like Mr. Ramadurai, Mr. Gopalakrishnan himself. They're all professionals who have come with very, very stellar professional track records, which have either been built within the group or outside the group. And they've also grown right from the start or from a later stage with the philosophy of the group, accepting it and then evangelizing that philosophy. So the way I see the Tata Group across my career is that it's a very, very professional group which has institutionalized that philosophy and taken it forward. The reason that this philosophy has sustained and will, in my view, will sustain over the next 150 years is that it's not only at the level of Chairman Tata Sons, but at the level of the leaders of every single company of the group and their direct reports and so forth, the philosophy of Jamsetji Tata is very, very strong in their minds. And it's perpetuated across the group. Like Mr. Gopalakrishnan said, a river running through and many, many tributaries of that river. It's perpetuated across the group through these icons, through these leaders. It's perpetuated through the narratives. It's perpetuated, which is why we do a lot of storytelling in this book, or also real life storytelling within the group as well. And it is perpetuated through the rituals of the group. Whichever company you go to, whether it's Tata Sons or Tata Steel or Tata Motors, we observe Founders Day on the 3rd of March. We pay homage to the values of our founder and rededicate ourselves to those values. We observe JRD Tata's birthday on the 29th of July, pay homage to his quest for business excellence. And we do that across companies of the group. So one of the things that you will find when you read this book is that the Tata Group has been remarkably successful at institutionalizing those philosophies and those principles. So if you look at the next 150 years, whoever the leaders are over the next 150 years, if this institutionalization continues, I have no doubt that this philosophy will continue and flourish over the next few generations as well.
Fantastic. That's some enduring legacy. So the next question, in the book, profit is one of the last piece that you cover, right? And the question that's come up, this is from Sanjay Tanwani. He says that if this is the way it works, then how do you calculate the ROI for a project? And so if you were to set up a new business, what's the ROI that you would look for?
Okay, I'm going to answer in a minute or two and hand over to Mr. Gopalakrishnan. Mr. Gopalakrishnan told me once when I was a much younger manager and discussing something else with him, he said at Tata, we are as hungry as the other companies for making profits. We are very competitive. We go out in the market, we compete, we are market leaders in so many segments of the country, and we have delivered ROIs and return on capital employed, which is on par with the best in the land. So we are very, very competitive. The point that we make in this chapter on profit is that the Tata Group has used those profits with responsibility. Those profits eventually, through the dividends to Tata Sons and the Tata Sons dividends to the Tata Trusts, are channeled back to society and community. Those profits through each of our companies and the work they do for our communities are channeled back to our community. So we are not making the point here that Tata Group by any measure does not meet ROEs. Tata Group meets its ROI levels, whatever the ROI hurdle rates are, very, very well. But it is the responsible use of those profits which distinguishes the Tata Group. That's the point we make. Mr. Gopalakrishnan, would you like to add to that?
No, I just want to add that, having profit for the sake of profit is like saying I must have more and more oxygen in my lungs. Now, if you take a cylinder of pure oxygen in the hospital and keep breathing pure oxygen, you'll be dead. And ingrained in our thinking is too much profit can kill you. And you can see it all around you, the landscape. Too much money and generations later, avarice, all sorts of things set in. And we are not here to comment about other people. But profit must also be like 20% oxygen in the air, it will be 20% of something larger. And if you focus on those 80%, then you get the 20% also right. So environment, for example, sustainability, is an inherent part of the profit plan. And the ROI is then calculated after providing for it. Once in a while, we goof up, and Tatas do make mistakes, and some of them are in the book as well. We are fallible human beings. So there's one story that is narrated in the book about how before setting up a truck factory, Suman Mulgaonkar set up a forest in Pimpri in Pune. That's an example. And people said, are you building a nice forest or are you building a factory? He said, well, without the forest, there won't be a factory. That's back in 1970, 69, long before ESG was known. And there's another story. When I was vice chairman of Tata Chemicals, we were putting up a nice plant in Africa on the Rift Valley. And we got a message saying that if you put up this factory here, attractive it will be for you for profits, it will kill the nesting area for the little flamingo. After doing our homework, we wrote off $15 million in 1 quarter, which meant that Tata Chemicals for a company of the size of Tata Chemicals in those days, I'm talking of 15, 20 years ago, that quarter was obviously a loss. But we just came up and said, we didn't want to build a factory because in the long run, if the flamingo goes, it seems to have bad implications for the world. So those are examples of saying, when your profit planning and project planning takes into account all the P's, then you're looking for that return. You think Tata companies couldn't have made 3 times that profit if they did some of the things that are possible to do? I'm not saying other people do it, but it is not out of court to say that some people must be doing it. So it's an integrated profit plan, and that's what makes Tata competitive.
So
Because
Gopal
it's
sir,
long term.
if you don't mind my asking, you've written both in the Business Standard about this, and you've written in this book about this thing called the she company. If you could just elaborate on this she company concept.
Yeah.
Well, it's just a little catchword she, because it feminizes leadership in a world where all leadership is sort of masculine. S stands for sustainable, H stands for humane, E stands for enlightened. And I do believe that India's industrial policy does not encourage she companies. It doesn't discourage them, but it is not explicitly encouraging them. And that comes out of a holistic view of business. But that's what I'm writing about. And I offered Tata's in this book as an example of a she company, not the only one. And if somebody would write a book about Godrej or Bajaj, they may well come to a similar conclusion. And I made an attempt, as Saurav alluded to early in this webinar, of who are the potential she companies who 100 years from now will be counted as great institutions in this India. They may still falter somewhere down the line. I'm not standing up for that. But I wrote 6 companies who might qualify because of what they are doing today, which is Marico and Biocon and so on and so forth. So that's the concept of a she company who has an integrated view of business with community and are running their business on those principles or seeming to run their companies on those principles.
Salil, back to you.
Right. In fact, one more question preempted. So there was one on sustainability. So I think I would urge people to read about the Tata Motors plant in Pune and the artificial lake that was will be a fascinating story. So now, there are a couple of questions. I'll combine them. Is what happens when the external environment is not conducive or is not does not match with the principles of the group. So doing business in India, as we understand, is difficult at times. So how does the group reconcile what it needs to do versus what it may need to do to run a business? And within the group, there's something which happens which are against the principles of the group, right? You have a story there on Tata Finance. So I'd love to understand conflicts and how these are resolved.
So, Salil, let me start with an answer to that and then hand it over to Mr. Gopalakrishnan again. So, in the Tata Group, we are governed by a very, very firm Tata Code of Conduct. And integrity and doing business according to what we believe is right is central to the way the Tata Group works. The Tata Group will not, in my, from everything that I have seen, from everything that I've heard, the Tata Group does not tolerate any deviation from these principles. There have been businesses of the Tata Group which have taken a long time to come to fruition because this principle has been followed. And within the book, there are a couple of examples of this. I've also written about it in my earlier book, Tata Log. So I would say that, standing steadfast to those principles has been one of the key reasons why the Tata brand is trusted across the country. The integrity with which the group has done its business, and like Mr. Gopalakrishnan said, sometimes there are lapses. I'm not saying 100% the group has acted like that. There is a story of Tata Finance in this book, which describes a certain lapse and how the Tata Group responded to that. So I'm not for one saying that 100% this has been the way throughout 156 years of history. There have been aberrations, but those aberrations have been promptly dealt with by the group. And I will not get into specific examples here. But by and large, the group has stuck to the principles of integrity and doing business with principles, even if, like JRD Tata once said, even if it sometimes delayed or put things back a little bit. But in the longer term, it's worked to the advantage of the group because nothing beats having a brand which is trusted by millions and millions of people across the country. And the foundation of that brand is integrity. This is my direct answer to you. But Mr. Gopalakrishnan, if you would like to add to that.
No, I'll just leave two little examples which are very much in the public domain. I don't need to explain the stories. Uh, it is a matter of principle. Tata has walked out of Shingu in Bengal, for the car plant. And it is a very bold decision. Then you may argue it's a bit of luck that we went to Gujarat and Sanand is now a flourishing automobile center. But it is a matter of principle that things, the land acquired under very proper laid out government laws was being challenged and we were being hampered. So that's one small example. I won't go into the detail because I'm not an expert on Shingle, but I happen to be on the board, so I know a few things how we walked out. Very dramatic. The second is, you might remember that back in the 90s, 95, 96, we were trying to get airline, airport. You might remember this from the reportage at that time. We didn't get it. Somebody wanted something and we said no, and the airlines went to other people who have been much written about. And once on a journey, somebody said, if only you guys, it would have cost you hardly 10, 15 crores. If you had paid it, you would have been flying an airline now instead of, getting written about as a group that has lost all opportunities. And we are very proud of the fact that we didn't pay. If you lost the airline or if it comes later, that's okay. Okay, another 10, 15 years later, we are in the airline business back with sensible approaches or lack of sensible approaches, depending on who's viewing it. But those are examples from a very recent history, which I wanted to mention, where we said if you have to lose an opportunity, so be it. J.R.D. Tata, in his interview with Rajiv Malhotra, he said, if we were able to do all the things other people did, we would be 5 times as large as we are. But that's all right. We are who we are. So I just thought I would answer the question and leave it there.
Thank you. So this is an interesting question from Ravi Kiran. And he says, today, Tata Group is a multinational, multi-geography enterprise. How does the definition of nation building change as you grow from just being an India-centric business to a more global company?
Yeah, so Salil, here again, the mission of the Tata Group is really to improve the quality of life of all the communities that we serve, whether that community be within India, whether that community be outside India. So, there are many Tata Group companies today which are working in several countries across the world. And yes, that history of working in the rest of the world is much shorter than the history of working in India. We have been in India for 156 years. We may have been in another country for only 20 years or 40 years. But if you look at in each of those communities, Tata Group companies do their best to see how they can advance the quality of life of the community. For instance, if you take Tata Consultancy Services, which is present in many parts of the world, Tata Consultancy Services does a lot to encourage education in the STEM domain, in science, technology, engineering, and math, where there is a clear need to encourage young people in those countries to pursue those fields. Or, for instance, if you look at many of the marathons, which generate a lot of interest as well as a lot of community participation, marathons in many parts of the world are actually sponsored by Tata Consultancy Services, right from New York to London to Australia. If you take a company like Tata Steel, which has a presence in Europe, Tata Steel does a lot for the community there. In fact, one of the largest chess tournaments in Europe is actually organized by Tata Steel. Jaguar Land Rover contributes to the community around it. Jaguar Land Rover has been a consistent supporter of the Invictus Games, which support people from the armed forces who may now be physically challenged. And I can give you many more examples of how Tata Group companies are adding to their communities in the world outside. So, the stated mission is to improve the quality of life of each of the communities where we are present in. And that happens based on our history, based on the number of years we have spent in the community. It may be deep rooted in some communities, and in some communities it may just be taking root. So that's how the definition of nation building has evolved over the decades of the Tata Group's existence.
If you, Marcellus, if you don't mind, if I could just ask a question there.
Sure.
Since in the book you've described in great detail how the Indian Institute of Science, India's preeminent university, I think in almost all rankings of Indian universities on a global scale, the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore comes out on top. And in the book you've described how there was a 14-year sort of journey that Jamsetji began, but he couldn't fulfill it, and the amount of trouble he took to lay the foundations, or his son took to lay the foundations of the Indian Institute of Science. It's one thing for a promoter, for an entrepreneur to build great companies, but it's quite remarkable for a businessman to lay the foundations of India's greatest university. I'll leave it to one of you to decide what sort of impulse leads the Tata Group to try stuff like this, which is quite unheard of in the corporate context, to create the country's preeminent university at great cost and at great trouble to yourself.
Mr. Gopalakrishnan, would you?
I'll ask Harish to answer this if you wish. But
Sure.
I just want to add a rider to your question, which Harish can include. Many people who have made a lot of money have endowed universities.
Yeah.
Here is a person who has not made lots of money yet.
Yeah.
I'm talking of 1885, 1890.
Yes.
But because he met somebody on a ship to Yokohama who said, unless India develops scientists, that somebody being Swami Vivekananda, he started working on this project. So, Harish, over to you.
Yeah. So, very, very interesting question, Saurabh. Thank you very much for that. In Jamsetji's mind, Tata Steel and Tata Power and the Indian Institute of Science were not very different in their core objective from each other. Two of them were for-profit companies. One was a university. But for him, all these were serving essential needs of the nation. He thought domestic steel was important for India because he did not want India to be completely reliant on importing steel from Europe. He had heard that the nation which has steel has gold. That's what he had heard from Thomas Carlyle from one of his lectures. In a similar way, the fact that a university of technology, of higher education in science and technology, is essential for the country started taking root in his mind as early as 1892. He heard a lecture by Lord Ray. And Lord Ray pointed out in his speech, this was in 1889, Lord Ray was the governor of Bombay. And Lord Ray pointed out that India required universities focused on teaching and research if it had to advance further.
Yeah, brilliant.
And then just a year later in 1893, Jamsetji Tata met Swami Vivekananda on a ship from Yokohama to Vancouver. And the ship must have taken, I think it took about 18 days to sail that voyage. And Swami Vivekananda once again emphasized to him why it was important for the scientific temper or the scientific spirit to build in India if the country had to progress. So those were the two triggers in Jamsetji Tata's mind, Saurabh. By then, Jamsetji Tata, I think, had come to the firm conclusion that the one purpose of his life was to do something which had impact on the development of the country. And that's why he took Indian Institute of Science forward. Because he could not get Indian Institute of Science done immediately, in 1892, he took an interim step by announcing the J.N. Tata loan scholarships for Indian students going abroad for education. He did that because he knew a university will take time to come up. And then he pursued it with a huge amount of persistence. He knew he didn't have the wealth to do that all by himself, but he publicly announced that he would give half his wealth to the creation of this university. He then appealed to Swami Vivekananda to also evangelize this university on his behalf, which Swami Vivekananda indeed did through his magazine, the Prabuddha Bharata. He ran into multiple issues, including a lot of resistance from Lord Curzon, who was a viceroy of India at that time. And because he ran into resistance from Lord Curzon, he went directly to the Secretary of State for India in London and appealed to him, saying this is what India requires for the future. So he was very, very persistent in pursuing the establishment of the Indian Institute of Science, because he thought that it was essential for India's progress, that science and technology was essential for India's progress. And India did not have a university of higher education in science and technology at that time. So your question, why would an industrialist do this? I think if that industrialist was pursuing the central purpose of his life and the corporation that he set up, that the community and nation was center stage, that was the philosophy with which he wanted to pursue the group. This kind of dovetailed into that philosophy very, very well. In later years as well, Saurabh, it's not just the Indian Institute of Science. In later years, you've seen the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, the National Institute of Advanced Studies, where Mr. Gopalakrishnan was just a few days ago giving an address. All these are part of that same phenomenon. Let me ask you, in 1944, what made J.R.D. Tata evolve the Bombay Plan, which was the first, comprehensive economic plan for the development of India, economic development of India, released just before independence while he was an industrialist. It was the same impulse which made Jamsetji Tata think of starting the Indian Institute of Science. Can we do something for our nation? That's my answer, Saurabh.
And just drawing the line between the past and the present. So some of my friends who teach at IISc, they showed me in the lab how some of the research and the parts for the landing, the moon landing. India became the only country to land on the dark side of the moon. How some of that research was done at the IISc. So without this visionaries' thinking, efforts, lobbying, and fundraising 120 years ago, perhaps it wouldn't have been quite so easy for us to land on the dark side of the moon. Salil, back to you.
Can I add a small point for your viewers, because I know we're running out of time, which is that we had not planned it, Harish and I, but it just so turned out that this book is in the shape of an onion. It's comprised of a number of rings. Each ring is called a P. We got 10 Ps. And a reader pointed it out to me recently. He said, do you realize you can open this page anywhere and start reading?
Yeah.
You don't have to read chapter 1, 2, 3 to get to chapter 5. And this gentleman, by the way, 90 years old, the person who told me this,
right.
He said, I'm delighted. They're all connected and yet they are disconnected. Because I could I could read the epilogue first and then I could read chapter 5 and jump. And that genius, I told him, doesn't accrue to Harish and me. It's probably the fact that there's a holistic view we took, and I'm glad it's turned out that way. You agree, Harish?
Yes, I totally agree. Saurabh, when you write a book, and you are an accomplished author yourself, Saurabh, you know that you think of a book in a certain way, you design it in a certain way, but all the layers that the book assumes and all the magic that the book eventually brings to its readers.
Yeah.
You have done that with with the Unusual Billionaires, for instance. I've enjoyed reading your all your books, including this one. The magic comes from your complete immersion in the topic and your ability to distill concepts down to the core and explain them very simply, and also make the book as modular as possible. And I'd like to, before we end the discussion, Saurabh, I know we have only a couple of minutes left. I would also like to pay tribute to Mr. Gopalakrishnan. He is the person who built the scaffolding for this book.
Right.
The framework with the piece. And just as a personal anecdote, I'd like to, mention that he invited me to collaborate on this book on my birthday in 2022, 8th of November 2022. It was probably the best birthday gift I've ever received in my life. But after that, it's been such an enriching journey. We had discussions at the Bombay Gymkhana. We had discussions in the in Bombay House, where we talked about what the structure of the book should be. We talked about what narrative should go with the book. And I must tell you that the process of collaborating on authoring a book has probably been one of the finest processes that I've gone through in my life as an author. This is the first time I've collaborated and co-authored a book. For Mr. Gopalakrishnan, he has co-authored many books before this. So I just thought I would mention that as a personal point of view.
I think on a lighter note, a happy marriage enables you to collaborate without conditions.
That's true.
So I think
That-
Salil and I are very relieved to hear that. Salil and I think both have happy marriages, touch wood.
Yeah.
And we're trying to collaborate on a book. I think we aspire, and Salil, I hope you don't mind my saying, so we aspire to the standards set in this book of clarity, of structure, of just beautiful prose, great case studies. So I think simplest way to put this to anybody who has not read this is two great authors have collaborated to write a great book on a great man and his legacy. We hope all of you get a chance to read it. We hope all of you get as much out of it as we did. But thank you very much this evening to Harish Bhat, to our Gopalakrishnan, and to everybody on this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Salil. Over to you for final words.
And,
thank
and
you
before Salil takes up the mic, Saurabh, may I, on behalf of Mr. Gopalakrishnan and my own behalf, thank Marcellus for hosting this session with both of us. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable session.
Privilege.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, Mr. Bhat, and we will end this here. We are out of questions and out of time. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. Bye for now.
Happy Ganpati to you and your viewers.
Thank you, Gopal sir. Thank you.